Leona, thanks a lot.
That's the recording started.
Thank you very much, Leona. Good afternoon and welcome to this meeting of the Local Review Body. I'm Councillor Annette Ireland. I'm Chair to the Local Review Body. I welcome the elected members who are sitting on local reviews today. Provost Fletcher, Councillor Miller, Councillor Swift and Councillor Convery. Sharon McIntyre is the clerk to the Local Review Body. Andrew Benny is the independent planning advisor to the Local Review Body. He has had no involvement in the processing of the planning application, which is subject to review and before us today. Ms. Siobhan Wilson is the legal advisor and is responsible for preparing the Local Review Body's decision notices and to provide advice as and when necessary. I don't think we have any other members of the public with us today. Are there any apologies for absence?
Yes, there's apologies from Councillor Cunningham and Councillor McLean.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest on the item before us today? Thank you very much. We have one item, agenda item number 3, Notice of Review 2021-13, erection of dwelling house and associated parking adjacent east of 137 Mearns Road, Clarkston. First of all, do we have enough information before us to make a decision today?
Yes.
Yes, I think now, can I actually bring Andrew in at this point before I just move us any further on? I think there was additional information.
Yes, Councillor. Following the decision to refuse the application, the additional BAT survey, which the applicant had indicated would be submitted, was submitted. So that detailed BAT survey, which follows on for the original ecological survey, which accompanied the original application submission, wasn't unfortunately received until after the application was determined, albeit a notice had been given that it was due to be submitted.
Okay, thank you very much. If we decide that we need to see that information, does that move this deliberation on to the next meeting?
It would do, Councillor, yes.
Okay, I know that I have enough information in front of me to make a decision, but I'll open it out to the other members of the Local Review Body.
I also feel that there's enough information.
Could I just jump in just for a second, just to give
Yes,
advice, just in relation to the report on the BAT? So if you feel that you've got enough information, I know that within the papers it's not redacted, so it's there. You'd have to disregard that from your decision making today. In terms of whether you want to regard it or not, you should consider whether it is a new matter or not. So you've got the basis to disregard it. The legislation says that if it's a new matter, it doesn't need to be considered. But a matter is not just new information, it would have to be like a new topic, something that's not already come up. And even if it was a new matter, the LRB needs to consider it if it's to do with the local development plan or it's a material consideration. I think there's an argument that the reports are a material consideration because they refer to nature conservation, and it also does relate to the plan and policy. So my advice would be that then the new information should be considered, but obviously it is up to the LRB to take that on board. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm still of the same mind that I have enough information in front of me to make a deliberation, but I will be led by the Local Review Body.
I certainly think enough information to make a decision on what we have in front of us.
Councillor Swift.
Thank you very much, Chair. Would this make it potentially challengeable as a decision if a decision is made today?
Yes, that's correct, Councillor. So if it's a material consideration and it's district, we don't take it into, the LRB doesn't take it into consideration, it makes the decision potentially challengeable.
Okay, thank you very much. Provost?
You're mute, Jim.
It's okay.
Beg your pardon. Thank you. One of the objectors I noticed had made reference to the fact that there was a new planning application, and I think if I understand it correctly, the new planning application would in fact take the bat survey into consideration. I do wonder if it is, material as suggested by Siobhan there, are we not not wiser perhaps letting that new application come forward, be considered in the appropriate fashion by the planning officers, and if they still don't, think that it should be passed, which is quite possible, I would think, it would then come back to the LRB at the next meeting. It just seems perhaps as a more proper way to proceed.
Can I pass that back to Siobhan, please?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't understand the question. Was the query, Provost, about going back to the appointed officer and having their comment on the report?
No, the comment, if you look at one of the objections, there's a suggestion that there's a revised planning application, and the revised planning application refers to the bat survey. In other words, presumably the one which has been refused doesn't. Now, if it's material, as you seem to be suggesting, Siobhan, then are we not perhaps wiser to allow that revised application with the bat survey to go forward before we consider it as an LRB?
Sure. I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of the other applications, so my advice would be just to proceed dealing with this application, as we would normally. And if you think that in time something might happen with the other application, that might suggest it might be better to actually go get the appointed officer's opinion on these bat reports, and it might be that it sorts itself in the meantime if there's another application that's been decided.
Right, okay. I'm just a wee bit confused about whether the bat comments are material to what we should be discussing today or whether they're not.
I mean, it may be that there is sufficient other reasons that are sufficient enough to refuse the application or not, but there is still a potential that if it is material to the reason why it's being refused and it's not considered, because I know that the appointed officer did take into account a situation, part of it was considered by bats. If we then don't take account of the new details, that does make the decision challengeable. But like, it may be that the LRB may decide that actually, do you know what, there's enough other information here, enough other reasons to refuse, that we are content to proceed. But it's always still going to be challengeable.
Thank you very much, Siobhan. Councillor Swift, are you still wishing to come in? Because I had a quick question for Andrew. Andrew, I don't think it is material, and the only reason I'm saying that is that the reasons for refusal, none of those mention bats. So I'm quite happy to still proceed and make a determination.
Yeah, certainly, Councillor. One of the reasons for refusal, which relates to policy D8, does relate in part to the issue of the presence of bats on the site, but that particular reason is one of the 5 reasons for the refusal of the application. So bats isn't the sole, or the bat issue isn't the sole determining consideration, but it is one of the considerations. The other 4 reasons for refusal are self-standing and don't relate directly to any issues considering the presence or otherwise of bats on the site.
Okay. Thank you very much. As I said, I'm still happy to move on to determination, but I just want to check unless anyone's otherwise minded in the local review body. Okay. Can I just move us on? If we can make a note that we will make a determination and not look at that information, please. Then can I pass over to yourself, Alan? Sorry, Andrew. And just to speak to this, please.
Certainly, Councillor. Under the application which forms the basis of this review, planning permission is sought for the erection of a detached dwelling house and associated car parking on the land which forms the application site. The proposed application would be located at the southern end of the site, with the proposed vehicular access being taken off Beachlands Drive. The proposed dwelling house would stand 1.5 stories in height to the front, dropping to 2.5 stories to the rear to take advantage of the change in levels across the site. In order to accommodate the construction of the proposed dwelling house, most of the mature woodland planting within the southern part of the site would require to be felled. On a point of note, 7 letters of objection have been received in respect of this planning application. Summarising the reasons for the planning officer's decision, I would advise as follows. First of all, full details are provided within the report of handling, which forms part of the agenda papers. The report of handling indicates that the application requires to be assessed against the terms of policies D1, D5, D7, D8 and D9 of the adopted local development plan. The report of handling indicates that the removal of trees and the replacement with the proposed dwelling house would lead to a diminution of the existing character of the site and a significant loss of amenity within the wider area, and that hence the proposals are considered to be contrary to policy D1. This loss of tree cover in the associated development would also be detrimental to the landscape character of the wider area and would lead to a loss of open green space that is used by residents, and that as such the proposed development is contrary to policy D5. With regards to policy D8, the report of handling indicates that the proposed development would compromise the overall effectiveness of the tree preservation order which covers the site, and that the applicant has failed to provide information to demonstrate that the removal of the trees would not have an adverse impact on protected species and in particular bat hibernation roosts. For these reasons, the proposed development is considered to be contrary to policy D8. With regards to policy D9, the report of handling advises that the proposed development would diminish outdoor access and play opportunities, and that as such, the proposals would not comply with the spirit of policy D9. Moving on now to summarise the grounds of appeal put forward on behalf of the appellant. Once again, full details of the applicant's case is set out within the agenda papers. In summary, the applicant's agent makes the following points. The proposed development would be constructed on a very limited area of the woodland, representing less than 20% of the total tree cover. Some trees and bushes will be removed as part of the proposals, but none of these are of significant quality, and going forward, effective woodland management would help improve and retain a healthier, mature tree population within the majority of the site, further noting that no category A tree specimens will be lost as a consequence of the development. Next, the proposal will not have any significant prejudicial impact on nature conservation, with the ecological report submitted and the applicant's subsequent BATS survey demonstrating that this is the case. Next, there is currently no designated access to the site for the public. The public access that has occurred over the last few years has related to illegal fly tipping on the area where the dwelling house would be constructed and antisocial behaviour. The proposed development will prevent such undesirable uses to the benefit of the local environment. Overall, taking into account the proposals will result in a net environmental gain for the area, and there is no prospect of an undesirable precedent being established if the application were to be approved. Could I remind members that they are required to determine this review against the relevant provisions of the adopted development plan and also against any other relevant material considerations, which would include the terms of the emerging local development plan 2. And finally now, there are a number of conditions which I would suggest in the event that the committee determine that the review should be upheld, and I'll just run through these suggested conditions now. First of all, the development shall not commence until samples of the external finishing materials to be used on the proposed development have been submitted to and approved in writing by the planning authority, and that thereafter the development be implemented in accordance with these approved details. Secondly, that no development shall commence until a detailed report confirming the exact number and location of those trees to be felled as part of the proposed development has been submitted to and approved in writing by the planning authority. All felling work shall take place out with the bird breeding season, which is March to September inclusive, and all felling works shall conform with the approved details. Third, development shall not commence until details of the means by which those retained trees on the site are to be protected has been submitted to and approved in writing by the planning authority. Such details shall take into account the root protection areas associated with all of the retained trees. And the final condition is that development shall not commence until a scheme of soft landscaping works has been submitted to and approved in writing by the planning authority. And details of the scheme shall include the following matters: a scheme of tree and shrub planting, including details of the number, variety, size of trees and shrubs to be planted, details of the phasing of the landscape works, and finally a schedule for the maintenance of the retained area of woodland on the site. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I'll open it out to comments or questions. Councillor Miller.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. It's probably one of the few that remembers that kind of area, well, basically vaguely. That part of Beechlands Drive wasn't built to the late 50s, early 60s, and that was all woodland. And in the back of the other side of the road from where we were, there is still mature woodland there, and this part of the all that's left of the mature wood from way beyond my time, way beyond our parents' time. That's all that's left. Now, according to, just to prove, I've read some of the papers, it says the wall's in poor repair and it's an unmanaged woodland. Well, yeah, the wall is in poor repair, but then again, that's up to the owners to repair it. So they can hardly turn around and say, well, it's somebody else's fault. Same with the unmanaged woodland. It's them that's supposed to be managing the woodland. They also state in policy D9 that there's no loss of category A trees, but which is very true, but there is a loss of category B trees. And they state that the path has just been used in the last few years. Actually, I used to come home from school using that path, so that's well over 60 years ago. Well, no, it's just under 60 years ago since I was at Wilneywood. So some of the things that they've been saying that is not just quite accurate, and I would agree with the planning officers to refuse.
Thank you very much, Councillor Miller. Councillor Swift.
Thanks, Chair. The less said about that path, the better. Let's just start there. But moving on, do you know, taking a step back, I've never been a huge fan of site visits, but this was a good one. Not because I fell on the path, but I think it was a good one because it changed my mind about this application, because I went into it thinking there's no way in the world that I would approve of developing this site. Now, I know this will fly in the face of public opinion, but actually the site opposite's being developed. And one of the things that swung it was a mutual friend of Stuart and I was chatting to her at the back end of it, and she lives there. And I said, well, what do you think? You know, because it's kind of not so sure. And she said, oh, I don't care. You know, and she said, and the people who used to live in there were terrified of the trees. They've since moved out, by the way, and the people who moved in there do not want the site developed. But the people who lived in there before, she said they were terrified of the trees coming down. Now, what would be a very handy thing for them is the trees can't come down if they've been taken down professionally, but that's another site or another thing. Stuart talked about the path. Well, you know, I fell on it. Is it safe? Well, that's another whole separate matter altogether. But one of the things that's quite clear and obvious is yeah, you know, Stuart said that the woodland wasn't managed, and it was their responsibility, the owner's responsibility, to manage the woodland, and it's the owner's responsibility to look after the wall, and the owners have all the responsibilities, but none of the benefits of owning that land. And that, I think, is quite unreasonable and unfair, and that lack of amenity in their own ownership of that land. Everybody else seems to benefit from that, and the people that round it. Some of them seem to be keen on retaining that as an urban woodland or protected urban green space. But if people valued it, why would they dump so much rubbish there? And there is a lot of rubbish dumped there. And that was one of the reasons I slipped on my bottom going down the path, because I wanted to see, was it something that was verdant and green, and well, nothing's very verdant just now, everything's a bit brown, but was it kind of a reasonable nature type place? And it's not particularly. It's covered in the inevitable Buckfast bottles and empty cans of Tennent's, and other alcoholic beverages are available, but and probably empty receptacles thereof on that site. But clearly there's an enormous amount of garden waste in there. I mean, is obvious to all of us that people have just been dumping stuff there. And that, I think, if you've got young kids drinking there in an unsupervised and unsafe way, that's not a benefit to anybody's community. Least of all, that community, I would assume. So from my perspective, I kind of think it's in the middle of a residential area. It's what would be traditionally called a gap site. It offers nothing of any significant utility to the local community as it in its current form. And actually, the best thing that could be done is either fence it off completely, build a proper path either side of the fence, or develop it. And nobody's going to pay for it all to be fenced off and made safe. Why would they? And if the public really wanted it, and it's something I was kind of jocularly thinking about when I was down at the site, is if people genuinely value land that is in a gap site, I would like to see some sort of legislation at Holyrood that is offered to the community as a potential, but they have to buy it and pay for it. If they really wanted it, they should be offered it and allowed the opportunity to buy the land at a commercial value. And so, yeah, what do I think? I think, in essence, if most of the trees would be retained, apart from the ones at the top that might fall over and knock down next door's roof or something like that, if it would provide a safer place for the community in lots of different ways, and the trees will be retained, as I say, at the bottom, and there are no category A trees, and I accept that there are category B ones, I don't have a problem with this. I actually think the best use of that land is development. So there we go. I expect nobody else will agree with me, given the conversations that we had at the site, but that'd be my view for what it's worth.
Oh, thank you very much, Councillor Swift. Promised?
Just unmute myself, thank you. I mean, I do actually have some sympathy with what Councillor Swift is saying there. So I probably am a bit more supportive of him than he may imagine. I mean, I don't like to see mature trees felled. I don't suppose any of us do. And it seems to me the only real objection to that from the people who have objected is that they don't want to see an element of the woodland destroyed. But I have to say, it didn't strike me as being visually attractive. I think the path is dangerous. I can't imagine that many of the local residents would use it. As you say, I suspect it's used by maybe young kids drinking, and the evidence of the Buckfast bottles and the cans of lager and whatever, and even a traffic cone that's been thrown down there would suggest that it's not overly valued. It's been used as a fly tip, or people just throwing rubbish down there and nobody's clearing it. And as we saw, clearly somebody's been dumping garden rubbish there rather than sticking it in a brown bin. Maybe they don't want to pay their 30 quid, I don't know, but it's clearly getting used to dump garden refuse there. So I don't think it's not visually attractive to those who live there. And I don't think it's an area, despite what the planner said there, that, you know, it's open space for people to play. I don't really think, as I say, anybody would feel safe going down that path at the moment. You know, it's overgrown, strewn with rubbish, and it's not visually attractive. My main concern in all of this is if we don't approve it, I mean, somebody's bought this to develop it. They're clearly not maintaining it. And as Councillor Swift said, why would they spend money They're not going to spend, a commercial company's not going to spend money to maintain it. So if it's not developed, it kind of lies there continuing to be an eyesore and probably getting more and more debris dumped in it, because who's going to clear it up? I suspect the landowner won't. I don't suppose local residents, when they don't own it, will fancy edging their way down there with a black bag and lifting it. Perhaps maybe some public spirited people might, but it was potentially a dangerous thing to do. So I do worry a little bit if it's just left to rack and ruin. And I presume the developer will just simply keep putting in applications of putting something in there to try and get the money back for whatever they paid for the site. So I'm kind of conflicted. I don't really want to see the trees go and understand the reasons for it. But I'm concerned if it's not approved, what we might well be leaving in the vicinity. And I would like to see that area at least, you know, something happen there, that if it's left as open space and mature trees, that somebody somewhere maintains it, and it's much nicer than it is at the moment for the local community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Provost. It wouldn't surprise you, Councillor Swift, that I am not in agreement with the points you were making. I hear what you were saying about the fact that, you know, that the path is not usable at the moment. It's a horrible day. It is slippy. There were some bits of rubbish that were lying about. Nothing that half a day of a litter pick couldn't sort out. That I don't think
estate agent signs.
I don't think it's an eyesore. I do appreciate that it is protected urban green space on our local development plan, and it's also got tree preservation order on it. It's one of the really few spaces that we have left of actual woodland, and I would want to protect that. I think it means a lot to, certainly to the people that have written in. It certainly means a lot to them, and even the points that the planners were making, that it would be, I think they've written down, it would lead to a diminution in character and significant loss of amenity to the area. Loss of trees in the southern part would be detrimental to the character and amenity. It would be detrimental to, again, to the landscape character, and lead to the loss of open green space. I want to try and protect that, especially because I'm thinking now, we've all been out and planting the trees recently for the wee woods that we're all doing when we're planting. I cannot in good conscience vote to do away with trees when we've all been out planting them. It's so incredibly important, especially with the fact that it is one of the very last few. If you look on the local development plan, there's only a couple of little spots left in, well, especially in Ward 4. There's just a couple of bits, and this is probably one of the biggest. So I will be voting to approve the recommendation that has been uphold the decision that's been made with the planners. Unless anyone else wants to speak, I would move that we do uphold that decision, but I would need a seconder. Councillor Miller, thank you very much. Unless anyone is otherwise minded, I'll open it up. Councillor Swift, do you have a seconder?
I don't know. I may not.
I'll second it. I'll second it.
Okay, can I pass that to yourself, Sharon, please? Thank you.
Thank you. So just to confirm, we've got a motion here, which is the motion in the papers, which is to uphold officer's decision and refuse planning permission. And that was put forward by Councillor Ireland and seconded by Councillor Miller. And then we've also got put forward an amendment to reverse the officer's decision and approve planning permission subject to the suggested conditions outlined by the planning officer and standard conditions. And that was proposed by Councillor Swift and seconded by the Provost. So can I just take a vote on both of those there, if that's possible? So just on the amendment there first.
Obviously, I'm going to vote for the amendment.
So yeah, we've got Councillor Swift and the Provost. Do I have any others for the amendment? No. Okay, and then for the motion itself, which was to uphold the officer's decision and refuse planning permission, can I just take the vote on that, please? So that's Councillor Ireland, Councillor Miller and Councillor Convery. So just to confirm, the decision of the local review body would be to uphold the officer's decision and refuse planning permission.
Thank you very much, Shannon. And that's the only one we have in front of us today. So thank you very much, everyone, for your time. And then we're going down in the back in the hatches now, because I'm going to try and
It's getting windy.
sort out some garden
It's getting
furniture.
windy out there.
I think I just saw my gate